So now we will start a panel discussion with emphasis on SDN. Software-defined networking is a terminology that is used a lot nowadays. It's a lot of hype is there. So it's mainly used for separating the data plane and control plane within the networking world. So control plane will be running on a standalone server, and it will be called as SDN controller. And there is a lot of confusion in the market with respect to these words like SDN, open flow. People use it interchangeably, but they are not same, they are different. Open flow is mainly used for communicating between an SDN controller and a data plane switch. So today's panel discussion, we will be covering a lot of topics in that area. So the goal of SDN is to allow network engineers and administrators respond quickly to changing business requirements. In a software-defined network, a network administrator can shape traffic from a centralized control console without having to touch individual switches. The administrator can change any network switch rules when necessary, prioritizing, deprioritizing, or even blocking specific type of packets with a very granular level of control. This is especially helpful in a cloud computing multi-tenant architecture because it allows the administrator to manage traffic loads in a flexible and most efficient manner. Essentially, this allows the administrator to use less expensive commodity switches and have more control over network traffic flow than ever before. SDN is sometimes referred to as a Cisco killer. I know a lot of Cisco employees are there. The reason is it allows network engineers to support a switching fabric across multi-vendor hardware and application-specific integrated circuits. As you know, like social networking sites, smart devices like tablets, iPhones, or like Android-based devices are generating humongous amount of network traffic. So more and more of this network traffic are being handled by public clouds like Amazon Web Services, Rackspace, Microsoft Azure, Google App Engine. Traditional networking is not planned for cloud computing multi-tenant architecture. There was a report recently that Amazon Web Services will reach $20 billion revenue. For each dollar that they get, they're going to eat $4 of enterprise market. So by 2020, they would have eaten $80 billion from the enterprise market. So who are the ones losing those revenues? So the big guys like IBM, Cisco, Oracle, these are the ones who are going to lose revenue to Amazon Web Services. So we have a highly accomplished and a diverse group of experts here to address on the topic. Our panel members will address on why SDN is important, where you see the growth, how companies will make money, how SDN is driving economic development. Cisco, HP, Juniper, Brocade, Huawei played a key role in the traditional networking market. Which companies will play a key role in the SDN space, startups or incumbents? Since we have a lot of ground to cover and only 1 hour to ask questions, so I'll be initially asking one question to each of the panel member, and then I will open it up to attendees. So thank you so much for your cooperation. So now let us hear from Guru Chahal. Guru is an investor and an advisor at Lightspeed Ventures. He has participated in several Lightspeed investments in networking as well as security infrastructure. So Guru, we would like to hear from you about the opportunities and challenges in SDN space.
Thanks, Sridhar. You know, this is a question that comes up very often, and the best way to answer it is this. If you look across the networking landscape from, let's say, roughly speaking, since the crash of 2000 down to 2010, and you look at that entire stack and the kind of changes it has gone through, if you compare it to almost any other industry, servers, storage, almost any other industry, the level of innovation, it's very clear, has somewhat lagged that what most of the infrastructure industries have gone through. So I call 2010s the decade of catch-up. And so between 2010 and 2020, there's going to be tremendous amounts of innovation in the networking side. And you know, the moniker of the day is SDN, but you can go by 5, 6, 7, 10 other names. It really doesn't matter. But these problems of agility, of automation, of single points of management, of easier policy-based configuration, of higher amounts of visibility and monitoring in the networks, of just overall less capex and opex. These are very, very real and problems that not too many people were focusing on in that first decade. So this decade, there's tremendous opportunity across the stack. So it's not any one area. It's across the stack, all the way from potential for newer physical vendors to potential for network virtualization vendors, potential for higher up in the stack in services, in monitoring, in visibility, in analytics. In all of these areas, there's a lot of scope for innovation. Now, from an investing perspective, we tend to take a very realistic look towards it as well, which is that the bar for innovation is definitely higher the further down the stack you go. So if you go into the market today, from an innovation perspective, it's actually not terribly hard from a technical perspective to make an argument that switches or routers should be, from a technical perspective, done in a better way. The problem is where's the go-to-market? It's very, very hard to be a new switch vendor. Probably in the last 10 years, Arista is the only, sort of credible vendor that has emerged, and it's not come from venture capital, I can tell you that, because it's a very capital-intensive business. So, as an investor, I see more innovation and more scope for value creation as you start going up the stack. So the bottom of the stack, consider those as ASICs, and almost no new ASIC vendors are getting, or ASIC startups are getting funded today by traditional venture capitalists, although there's a lot of corporate activity in that area. And then there's slightly more activity maybe in the physical boxes, definitely much more activity in the operating system and network virtualization space. And then as you go up in the stack all the way to Thousand Eyes, which is a Sequoia investment launched today, that's in the pure monitoring and analytics space. You wouldn't believe how much hunger there is in the marketplace for really good solutions that tell you how your network is doing and where the problems are and how to troubleshoot these problems and be a little bit more preemptive in how you treat the network. So the simple answer is it's across the stack. We're probably in the first innings of sort of a very, very long journey. This is 2013. The journey probably started really credibly in 2008, 2009. I expect the rest of this decade to be the decade of SDN. And the names might undergo changes, by the way. I'm sure on the Orange side, you're more interested in NFV than SDN. And on the enterprise side or some other segments of the market, they'd be more interested in SDN than something else. And there'll be other parts of the market which are only interested in cloud-based service delivery for networks, which you could argue might or might not be SDN. Is Zscaler SDN? I don't know. Depends on the definition of SDN, but it's a cloud-delivered network service. And there's a lot of, one of the Lightspeed investments for last year, Patino Networks is again that. It's a traditional network service, just chunked up and delivered as a subscription from the cloud. So there's all these different areas. Don't constrain yourself to here's a traditional catalyst switch, and what can I do? Can I make it an open flow recipient and do open flow controller? That's a very myopic and microscopic view of what SDN could be. Take a look at what's happening with mobile, what's happening with cloud, how the requirements from customers are changing, and what you can innovate. There's just tremendous appetite, especially in the venture capital side, for funding really interesting ideas.
Yeah, thank you, Guru. Now let us hear from Parveen Patel. Parveen is Principal Development Lead at Microsoft. He's playing a key role in SDN architecture at Microsoft Azure. Microsoft has the largest SDN deployment in the world. Parveen, what was the reason for moving to SDN architecture at Microsoft? And the second question is, what challenges you faced while managing huge network traffic at Microsoft?
Thanks, Sridhar. So, okay, yeah. So it's really, for us, it's really about agility at scale. If you go back 3 years when Azure really started, you have hundreds of thousands of servers, and you have customers which are coming every second, and they're deploying VMs, they want to create networks, they want to destroy networks, all on the fly, and the bandwidth demands on the internet traffic were also growing rapidly. So in that environment, how do you manage this thing? How do you build networks? How do you provision them? How do you monitor them? And the existing solutions weren't there. So that really led us to only one conclusion, that we have to do it in software. That's what we're good at. That's what we fully control. We can go full speed. So that's what we did. So SDN pretty much to us means doing stuff in software. and which is software in the VM switch, in the hypervisor, doing higher level functions in VMs, NFV, that's the buzzword of the day, but it was kind of a necessity. If we have to scale with the, as the demand grows, hardware solutions, just procurement time will kill you, right? It's 3 months, you order now and maybe it will show up. By then, your server has already lost 10% of its value. So things like that, just wouldn't work. So it was more of a necessity than anything else. And then we the moniker SDN, like Guru said, it just came about, and probably something else will come in. So for us, it's really about using software on the server to do networking, and that has allowed us to change the network completely. We support network virtualization on all kinds of hardware from 3 years ago to the latest and greatest, and we never had to, partition customers to one part of the network or some particular data centers, because it's all done in software. Yeah, I think that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Parveen. Now let us hear from Sergio Catanzariti. Sergio is Director of Network Architecture at Orange, Silicon Valley, France Telecom. Orange is a French multinational telecommunications corporation and represents the flagship brand of the France Telecom group. It is a global provider for mobile phone, landline, internet, mobile internet, and IP television services with 226 million customers. They process a lot of network traffic. It is interesting to hear from Sergio how Orange and other telco companies are planning to manage the network traffic in SDN era.
Okay, so about SDN, well, assuming that we really do know what we mean about SDN, so let's give this assumption, because the first model of SDN was the SS7 model, displacing of the control plane, the data plane. But assuming that, there are two spots where telco faces the major problems. One is the video, and one is the mobile. Both of them, the mobile is an incredible revenue generating. Video depends. For us, IPTV, you make money. If you deliver OTT video, you maybe make money indirectly through the fact that he wants to go with me because he wanted to watch his Netflix. So in those two spots, there is today no use cases at all for SDN. The differences with data center and telcos are we have so far the SLA that historically our cloud providers are slowly moving to that model. But the SLA changed the equation. How do you provide the services? So in this sense, we have the ability to program and managing, automating the network, good concepts. In practice, I say that who manages our network is usually that we delegate, we outsource to vendors. Most of the vendors do the management and provisioning, and they are pretty good in selling tools next to your box. But mobile and video are very important parts of the way to answer your question, how to manage our traffic. In video, we are moving towards CDN, like everybody. And SDN, yes, Verizon said I could use SDN for a building path from my service router, but it's not convincing because you can do very easily with the legacy equipment. On the mobile side is an interesting case because in the mobile side, the only thing that I think is valid to focus on SDN is two characteristics: abstraction and virtualization. The only thing that we virtualize today on the network is the path. We don't virtualize anything else, starting with the bits, with the electronics, and the switches, and the layer 2, layer 3, and blah, blah, blah. So in the network, in the mobile network, you have many types of resources, a license spectrum, a spectrum license. You have many types of access point to the network. There is where you start to having a concept of network as an abstraction, where you could use an SDN to look at your RAN, abstract from the Wi-Fi, from the small cells, macro cells, femto cells, and you start to deliver bandwidth in a way that could solve your particular problem, where you have your 1 million people watching a soccer team in specific neighborhood, where you have thousands of small cells, and you have to put another K in order to support that. So 2 areas where we see. SDN, we were there since the beginning. Okay, we participate in this open flow meeting. That, by the way, were all closed meeting run by Google, so that was not true. That was really open. So because you couldn't participate to many way, and don't get a blame, because I think Google is doing a tremendous effort, and we really have to thank Google about the innovation is doing in everything. But to just tell you that the primordial reason of SDN at the time it was called OpenFlow with the clean slate money was for the OTT to regain freedom in building their own networks. That's pretty much was well. So telco were supporting, true, but they were supporting indirectly into the DT Lab supports the intellectual intelligence that Rob Sherwood went to bring back to Big Switch. So remain a data center cloud providing technology. How we move to telcos, we have to mix and match with the use cases. And I think mobile and video traffic distribution are interesting cases where I particularly we do not see yet the SDN cases. So that's pretty much my answer.
Thank you, Sergio. So now let us hear from Mallik Tatipamula. Dr. Mallik is Vice President of F5 Networks and is also a NIT Warangal alumni. Question to Mallik. Can you please tell us what type of SDN applications will be deployed by startups or existing network vendors? Also, what F5 Networks is doing in SDN space, and what are the opportunities for F5 Networks in SDN space in coming years?
Okay. That's a pretty long, involved question. So, where should I start? So anyway, when it comes to SDN, right, let's first of all baseline the definition of SDN from, at least from a F5 perspective. So SDN is a concept. It's an architectural concept that has got 4 fundamental principles: an abstraction, programmability, virtualization, and orchestration. You know, and Sergio already covered why they need abstraction and virtualization. So with that definition, which is different from OpenFlow, OpenFlow is a protocol of choice, whereas SDN is a concept. You know, so how do you apply this concept at various parts of the network, whether it is enterprise network or service provider network? Various parts means whether it could be data center, or it could be core, or it could be access, or it could be aggregation. How do we apply that? And what sort of use cases and problems are we going to solve using SDN? So in terms of applications, obviously the first one is a cloud or data center. That's where the first problem. How SDN is going to address that? Essentially the server virtualization happened first. How do we extend that to the network side of it? How do we create a seamless virtualization between server and network? You know, and how can we create common orchestration? You know, when it comes to resource, it's all about server point of view, it's all about processing CPU cycles. From storage memory point of view, it's all about logical units, how fast you can access memory. From networking point of view, it's all about VLANs and VXLANs. So what customers like Orange is talking about is, how do I realize the best quality of experience while delivering applications to the end user in a very cost-effective way? That's as simple as that. So how do we realize quality of experience? only when you have all the resources in place. What does it mean? We need to have a common orchestration, a common management of those resources between server, memory, and networking in a seamless virtualized environment. You see, at the same time, how can we provide flexibility through APIs? So that's where the programmability comes into picture. And how can we create an abstraction so that there's a lot more what do you call multi-vendor interoperability as opposed to create stickiness? How can we create that abstraction? So in terms of cloud, the fundamental problems to solve is the scale and automation in terms of integrated rapid provisioning of resources, and the consolidation of data center infrastructure. A lot of operators that I speak with, they have data centers, one for wireless network, they've got separate data center for wireline, they've got third data center for business applications. So now they're consolidating all the data centers and creating one single data center for any type of application and access. So that's where the SDN/NFV are going to essentially be the first place to apply these concepts. The second area is a wide area network side. The wide area network side, what customers have done, they have deployed number of layer 4 to layer 7, so-called IPsec, NAT, DPI, and so on, all over the map. They deployed one for wired fixed broadband side, they deployed another for mobile side. So the idea here is that how do I consolidate these functions and virtualize them? At the same time, today most of the devices are coming from multi-vendor like Allard, Sandvine, Juniper, Cisco. So every one of them have got on-device management, which is CLI based, that is static, prone to error, and time consuming. So the idea is that how do I take on-device management to off-device, have a common orchestration, and create a kind of one-click provisioning. When my traffic is growing, my subscriber base is growing, I've got millions of sessions running, it's very hard to provision every session. So that's the second thing, right? The first one is I've got multiple physical boxes, how do I consolidate and virtualize? Second one is I've got on-device CLI-based provisioning, how do I automate it and create a kind of a centralized orchestration system? The third problem is that every bit of traffic coming from internet side towards a user, could it be YouTube, could it be Netflix, could it be voice or UWords from AT&T, every bit of traffic has to go through these middle boxes. There is no application level intelligence. You see? So what customers are saying that, you know what, why should I upgrade my firewall when YouTube traffic has to go through it? It doesn't need to be upgraded. So the current networks are subscriber level granularity. What customers are saying, I don't want subscriber level granularity that is provisioned based on VLAN that customer is coming on, or based on PBR, which is source IP based provisioning. I want much more application level granularity so that I know how to steer YouTube traffic, Netflix traffic versus voice and video, that I have my own traffic. So you can see the number of challenges on wide area network. Multiple physical boxes, on device, and subscriber level granularity. That customers want more application level granularity, more better network automation through centralized orchestration, and more consolidation and virtualization. So these are the fundamental principles of SDN, how that is going to address the problems that have been created for the last 10 years to solve the total cost of ownership as well as the best quality of experience at lowest cost, both in the cloud and wide area network centric view. So with that, now let me talk about what is F5 view. F5 view is very simple. F5 view is looking at SDN with that 4 fundamental principles: abstraction, programmability, virtualization, and orchestration. We apply SDN, we call it as application layer SDN, we apply SDN from layer 4 to layer 7. What ONF is looking at today is purely SDN in the open flow context. So when you look at ONF, all the working groups in ONF are extending open flow for transport, IPv6, MPLS kind of things, or providing configuration through their config working group, but purely focused on open flow protocol. From our point of view, the way we look at it is, how do we connect application layer to underlying network infrastructure, but at the same time create an abstraction so that applications do not have to know underlying infrastructure to deliver the best quality of experience to the end user. So from our point of view, we are looking at SDN from layer 4 to layer 7 to create that programmable network for having that flexibility with application awareness to provide that best quality of experience, and virtualize and have orchestration with APIs for programmability. So that's the difference between what's happening in the industry versus what we are doing at F5. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mallik. So now let us hear from Michael Howard. Michael is co-founder and principal analyst at Infonetics Research. He's a frequent speaker at industry conferences as well as comes on TV channels. So what are the current market trends in SDN?
That's a wide open question. I think maybe I'll characterize that there's a lot of companies focused on data center and maybe data center to data center interconnect, but mostly inside the data center. And so I think of that as enterprise SDNs. And I've been more focused on service provider SDNs, which many have referred to already, are very complex networks compared to what is a simple contained domain, the data center. Data center is mostly Ethernet switches, storage, the servers, of course, and how you manipulate traffic and virtual machines inside of a data center environment. The service provider, though, they see, so I think the state is, someone mentioned it already, that Google did the industry a great service in investing with Stanford, Nicira, VMware, plenty of others involved, some operators, other manufacturers, but figured out how to solve the data center problems that they had with SDNs. And in fact, 2 years ago when I started looking at this, I met with Martin Casedo, out of Stanford, founder of Nicira. And I said, wow, you've really created a movement here, the open flow. He said, no, we solved an operational problem. So he brought it right back to earth, that open flow doesn't mean anything. It's a nice standard interface that enables a lot of people to communicate between controllers and hardware in a common way. But it's really what you do with it. So that was a big eye-opener. So what operators then saw that and said, wow, Google actually made it work in their data centers. They used SDNs inside their data centers. They used SDN between their data centers, built their own network, in fact on their own Ethernet switch hardware, so commodity, if you will. So they did this nice service to the industry. SDNs can work, solve the operational problem, automate, abstraction, all those nice characteristics that everybody wants. Really what operators and everybody's, and maybe Guru, what you were saying about this decade, it's really, whatever you call it, it's automation, flexibility, efficiency in an on-demand environment. I think that embodies most of what SDNs are trying to achieve. So where are carriers? Yeah, they want to do that. They have something much more complex, much harder problem to solve than the data center, but there's a much bigger payoff for them as well. So where are we? We're at the very beginning, the very, very beginning. Although some as Google and Stanford were working together, NEC and NTT were working together, and last year, the first, using commercial software from NEC, NTT had started operating a customer cloud service. That's the first and only operator SDN, but maybe not the only now, but I think it was the first commercialized service, and it's still running. And so where are we? Nobody else has a commercialized SDN service. They're all working on it. They have proof of concepts in the labs. They're testing hardware, software. So where are we? We're at the beginning. We're maybe in the embryonic stage. So trends, yeah, lots of people working on it. It is a fundamental change for data centers and for service provider networks, just a long trail.
Thank you, Michael. So now I open questions to attendees. So who will be asking the first question? Can you come over here and ask question? Just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Shankar, and yeah, I just have a pretty basic question regarding the impact of open source development on the SDN standards. There are a bunch of there's a lot of open source work. So the ONF is working on the OpenFlow protocol itself. Then a couple of years back, I think 2009, 2010, OpenStack really got up, and of course they worked on providing a lot of code for making infrastructure as a service easy, and then they also have a quantum plugin for which works with networks. And now about 2 months back, there was another project called Open Daylight, which opened up, which was actually by the Linux Foundation, and they also kind of so I think their goals are pretty open-ended right now. They're not saying anything. Well, they're not that particular from what I was able to read. So how do you see this impacting the industry? And how do you see this impacting a lot of the startups that are working on the SDN space, particularly like Big Switch and the others?
I can answer about a couple of questions about the open source in network open. I think we start in Orange. We look at open source in 2006. No, in 2005 was an interesting company, and we did also some proof of concept using Asterix, PBX, and blah blah blah. And Vayara was offering pretty good. There is a lot of problem in the open source. The major problem is how we're going to solve the maintenance problem, the customer service problem, the reliability problem. When the customer calls and regulator calls telco usually when something happen in the bad and in the good. Look at Verizon and the FBI. But I'm saying the Open Daily Light is an interesting thing because already Big Switch said that they are going for clashes with Cisco and blah blah blah. So the open source for me remain really very hard problem to solve if you want to sell to telecommunications, to telco carrier grade box. Whereas, Michael, you were saying we are not in the data centers, but we are in the emerging countries where we cannot put fibers, coppers, satellite, radio. So that is where you're gonna have. So I personally think it's a good movement, but I wouldn't bet too much today because de facto nobody using an open source. So who is the open source? Vayara has been bought already and been already monetized as part of the vendors. So that's my personal take in the telco space.
I agree with Sergio. So the response is kind of mixed, right? So you see the demand for open source from innovation perspective, right? So I will give you 2 examples. So when it comes to SDN controller, I had a chance to work with one of the leading SDN controller vendors, and they used 3/4 of their software open source, like Zookeeper, Puppet. So at least 3/4 of the software they had was open source. Literally, they have written 150 lines, 150,000 lines of code by themselves. So if you are really looking from distributed system perspective, if you are really looking from some of the configuration, some of the the classic distributed system algorithms, so open source will continue to be in demand because that's where the innovation is taking place. So some of the SDN controller vendors are leveraging that open source software while developing the SDN controllers. That's the first part of it. The second part, the Open Daylight, or one of those things that ON.lab is leading, right, Guru Parulkar and team. So open source SDN controller, what does it mean? So I agree with Sergio, if you really want to apply it in telco environment, it has to be telco carrier grade, 5 nines, maintenance, support, and so on, But having said that, there is a sector that is going to use open source SDN controller that's called Research and Education Network Community. You see? So they're always 5 years ahead of the market. So they want to create a test bed. They want to basically, create some innovation on top of that. So that is going to accelerate the commercial grade, innovation and deployments. So I would say there is a demand for such kind of controller, but in research and education network community to give guidance to the commercial aspects of it. That would help telco grade commercial design, development, and deployment aspects.
If I might interject with you, I wanted to spend to answer about the open source. There are two types of activity. One is the open source software, kind of open daily light. And you don't see any telco there. The other one is the open hardware that Facebook is promoting to the open compute. And the open compute, you might see interesting stuff there because open hardware allow you to focus on the main characteristic at the hardware level that make a telco grade. If you really think about what really truly happened when we also had the ATCA, remember the ATCA standards was a bit, yeah, look, correct. So but this is a pretty good console. Open hardware allows you, in my mind, to harness a bit of innovation, because the problem with the kernel label and the messaging label and the board label and the interlock label and the timer label, that's where you usually have. So I think I'm encouraged, but look the conflicting arguments here. Google build their open platform without sharing with the community has no access to what they are doing. Facebook aimed to open the open compute model and reference switch for other players. See, even in the open source model, you have so much complex depending on the monetization model and depending also on the type of services they want to build.
Just Guru, maybe you can answer. Are you investing in the open source?
I remember the remark that I made about in the first decade in the 2000s there wasn't the pace of innovation in networking lagged, and there was considerably more innovation outside. A large part of that innovation outside came out of two developments outside of networking. The first development was open source, and the second development was cloud, like AWS. And what these two developments do largely from a startup investing world is that they give you a pre-built foundation for a house. And then the architect is it's what kind of house do I want to build on top of that? As an investor, I don't have to over and over give money somebody, 30-40% of the money that I give them, they're building the same foundation over and over. There's no innovation in foundation making. That stuff is done. So in that sense, love open source, and I think some of these more software-oriented startups and established vendors are now users of a lot of open source code like Zookeeper and others to build really interesting solutions. So that's sort of the general comment on open source and its impact on network innovation in SDN. To answer your question, the same foundation now is available to networking innovation dreamers as well, so they don't have to go and build that. So it's great. As an investor, we like to see and invest in businesses that operate in large markets, and have great margins. Okay, margins. Look at it from an investor perspective. You're looking for a return on money. You're looking for a company to get really big one day. Hopefully, go public. When you go public, you have a PE, which will govern your market capitalization, which will govern the investor's return. That PE, in most cases, is proportional, among other things, to the margin that you drive. Open source businesses generally and service-oriented businesses generally don't drive very high margins. And that's sort of the investor perspective on that. So in general, do we invest in open source? Sometimes, but it's a little bit against the grain. We like to invest in companies which have something on top of that, something additional, a differentiated IP that might or might not be accessible to someone else. If you have differentiated IP, you open it up to everybody else and say, I'm just going to take your phone calls and take maintenance calls, the margins on that are pretty low in general, and that creates a problem for investing from a large investor perspective. Now, they might still be investing dollars for that sort of business, but it's hard to create a very massive company on venture dollars on that. But it's actually remarkably easier to create on a self-funded company with that model. So, there's pros and cons, but I'm just taking the pure venture capital perspective.
So next question. So who has next question?
The last decade, everybody was talking about SOAP and web services, enterprise services. Those were the three main keywords. It was always SOAP, service enablement, web services, enterprise services. And this decade is like completely, it started with cloud, and then we are talking of SDN, and then there are more concepts coming, waiting to come onto the market space. So without cloud, can there be SDN enablement? Or was cloud a major enabler for SDN as a concept or as a architecture?
It's less. Yeah, yes, in the controller you have a lot of, in the OpenStack and the controller you can use a lot of REST-based API more than SOAP, because SOAP is based on XML pretty heavy. So it's coming. Once you go to the northbound API, I think you have to think about web service light, because you have no any other way to build application using the SDN controller function. So it's not yet there. But SOAP, SOAP is in the networking sphere. If you want to use controller to control plane to the data plane, I'm not so sure it's the best.
I think, when you talk to any customer, right, it's all about three things: economics, experience, and enablement. How can I reduce my total cost of ownership and find new revenue sources? That's what economics means, right? And how can I provide best quality of experience? That's what experience means. So, and then how can I create the flexibility to enable new service models? Because as you said, last 10 years, some services that existed. Next 10 years, God knows, we don't know what kind of services are going to come in the marketplace, right? So the flexibility to enable. So unfortunately, last 10 years, we spoke about number of things, but we never implemented a common framework to enable the third-party applications on the network infrastructure, because it's pretty much closed. So from my perspective, SDN has those principles, a way of implementation to offer economics, experience, and enablement to the operator or customers or enterprise providers. And again, SDN is a principle to offer those things. So SDN is a concept. It's not any new, thing like either cloud or 3G, 4G. It's not a way. It's a way of implementation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, but going back to his original question, will there be SDN without the cloud? I don't know. In my opinion, I think cloud provided the right incentives for somebody to go invent things, to go look at the stack end to end and say, how can we solve this problem? And I think Google, Amazon, us at Microsoft, because you can look at the entire stack, you own the whole thing all the way from supply chain to the customer relation. You look at things holistically and you say, okay, I'm paying too much for this, and every 1% adds up. So without the cloud, I don't know if there will be incentive or there will be enough movement behind it. The concepts existed before, right? I mean, there was, it wasn't called open flow, but it was there for security, to do flow-based control and so on, but it didn't really get any traction until cloud happened.
Can I ask a question? So how do you measure the largest SDN deployment? Because you could count Google's data centers, I think.
Probably, yeah. Those I didn't claim that we had the largest SDN. We, yeah. So we do use SDN in both LAN and within the data center. Google definitely uses it as well, and they have more servers than we do. Amazon has more servers than we do. So I don't know if we are the largest.
One of the largest.
One of the largest.
Yes. Consumer facing. That's important.
There is one difference.
For consumer facing, that's where.
That is one big difference.
Has to go.
Yes.
Okay.
Between
You have to qualify it.
Between Hotmail, SkyDrive, Bing, and Office 365, it's probably.
Hi, my name is Srini. There are a bunch of SDN startup companies right now. I mean, do any of these companies have the business model to sustain long term on their own, or are they hoping to have some kind of exit strategy? I mean, to be acquired by large companies. I mean, even if you take companies like NIT or Big Switch, I mean, a bunch of other startup companies, I don't think they have a revenue model where, I mean, they can sustain in the long term on their own. So what are your thoughts on this?
Keep looking at me.
We are poor people.
So trust me. It's a great question. So the flip answer would be, of course, everybody has a business model. Otherwise, no investor would ever give you money. So that's a flip answer. But to give a more nuanced answer, everybody has a business model, but not everyone has great product market fit. Right? Sometimes you develop. Actually, there's three sort of different segments of call them companies, startups, technology, whatever. So sometimes you have a technology hunting for a problem. Okay, OpenFlow you could categorize in that. Sometimes you find a fit, sometimes you don't. But boy, that's a lot of luck. Right? So technology looking for a market. Sometimes you have a technology which is great, has some relevance. No, it's great. It has a market, but not a lot of relevance. It's not the top of mind. Sergio might say, wow, that's really nice. I could use it, but my boss is not yelling about this for me. Come back next year. That's a large segment of startups in general, even outside of SDN, fall in that bucket. Okay? And then there comes the unicorn, the magic one, right? Which is great technology, great market, and absolute relevance. This is the customer conversation. This is the customer conversation here is, at the bottom of the stack, the customer conversation is, customer goes, wow, we should talk more, because boy, my brain cells just fired up, but yeah, come back in a few years. In the second segment, the customer goes, this is really interesting. This solves problems, just not my immediate problem. And in the first segment, the customer goes, what do you mean you're at alpha? I don't care. Just give me the code dump right now. Can we at least start playing with it right now? And then we'll give you feedback and you harden it and then I'll deploy it. That's the company we want to go after. So when we invest, we're looking for not a technology solving problem. And I use, we broadly, I should say that at Lightspeed, when we look at investments, we're looking at like technology solving, hunting for a problem, not technologies which are interesting, could have a better market fit than the existing technology that is not a big input. And that's just the data set for technology. Just the data set. Forget about the relevance. That's the thing. It's amazing. Now, we're early stage investors. People confuse that. So almost by definition, opportunity and the fact that incumbents will go away funded. That's not what I'm saying. So there's a lot of risk in how we fund. If 100% of that stack changes, it's quite likely that 90% of the change comes from incumbents and saying, okay, because they will respond. Obviously, F5 is not technology. It's a very smart company. It's going to respond. The market is large enough. They will find that. But yes, there is value creation as the market is large enough. That's hundreds of billions of dollars. So even if 10% of that is available to startups, boy, that's a as an employee or an entrepreneur, you want to stay away from other companies right now that are following that path. Don't get enamored.
I have an answer from a different point of view, and that is, we talked to 100 North American large and medium-sized corporations. 95% of them said, yes, we're interested in SDNs. And about 65% of them said they're going to first look to their existing equipment vendors to buy SDN and learn about it. So,
I mean, that's how they work in their life.
yes, okay.
One perspective we have is, a lot of these startups come to us and say, use us in the cloud, but all they're selling us is various kinds of controllers. It's like, what can I do with it? There's no applications. It's like, oh, buy my controller. So I know what to do with them.
Like Nicira, Martin Gaseda said,
Right.
no, we didn't just build a controller, we solved an operational problem.
Yeah, we will definitely see Linux, Red Hat kind of company in SDN. We will definitely see it. They will be disrupting. So it will happen in the next 5 years. Or it could be Big Switch. So Big Switch was developing an open source software. First they started with Floodlight, then they opened Indigo, and then they started working with Cisco. There was a big splash 2 months back, and then 1 week back they said enough is enough, we'll do our own work. So let's see like if Big Switch will be the Linux Red Hat for SDN.
I mean, on that topic, if you take the data center, Amazon was able to basically leverage their existing infrastructure, their AWS system, because especially for the small businesses, even though you promise, let's say you promise a 10 gig, compute power, but ultimately they may provision only 1 gig because it's on demand. So that's why they're able to get a lot of margin on their business.
Statistical multiplexing is how they make.
Exactly. So, but on the switching side, like you mentioned earlier, Arista is probably the only company that has been successful outside, in
recent past.
In the recent past. Today I have seen, the Cumulus networks, they have released a Linux distribution
yes.
To run the, switching on the bare metal. So do you see a potential there? I find it kind of interesting, because, especially for a...
Indigo software is
yeah.
open source.
Yeah.
It runs on white box switches.
All right, yeah, okay.
Indigo is from Big Switch.
Yeah. Because still, this market is huge. Billions of dollars. You're talking about disrupting maybe $20 billion of maybe Cisco business in the long run. If we get the pieces.
Yeah. You keep looking at me as you ask those questions. It's kind of unnerving. Why don't we let you go first? Because I think the Cumulus question is very pertinent and much more relevant to your work.
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting, and whether even if that saves you a few percentage of your total spend, I think it is big in the overall scheme of things. And I think people keep saying Linux of networking. I think the Linux of networking is Linux. There isn't a new OS. It is Linux with Quagga and a few other things thrown in, right? It is Linux. So that's what Cumulus does. That's what every vendor uses internally. Right? You ask them, hey, I want to run this RPM. They say, yeah, go ahead. It's just Linux. So, well, on the switches, we are running Linux. No matter which vendor you go to, you end up with Linux. So I don't think that's any different. So what Cumulus will let you do is you can go to ODM and buy the software for Cumulus. But like the telcos, it has to be enterprise grade. There's all those things that come in.
Slightly from a storage background, but I do have networking as well. So, question is, do you see any convergence between software-defined storage and software-defined networking? And what are the opportunities that lie around there? I think it's going to happen because if you're talking about software-defined data center, there needs to be some convergence somewhere.
Simon, and on a lighter note, you need to attend our next conference, which is Software-Defined Infrastructure on July 10th. You'll get the answer. But anyway, let's get the answers from the current panel speakers.
That's a great question. It's a great question. And I think at a larger level, the question is, once everything is abstracted and software-driven and highly automated and programmable, what additional constructs can you build on top of that? And I think I'd have to project out that if the world sort of moves in this direction and you truly have software-defined infrastructure in the data center, then that's sort of like, the question is, why would you do that? Why would you have software-defined infrastructure? And the only real answer is to be able to run more integrated and better applications and interesting applications on top of that. So I think that convergence to some extent at that layer, at the application layer, is a very natural consequence. But at the infrastructure layer itself, would people start hanging hard drives off their network devices? I don't know. I'm not that much of a technical head. I really don't see what the saving would be. But it's an interesting question. I'd be curious, what Orange and Microsoft certainly as sort of large data center providers think about this.
I have two answers for you. One pessimistic and one optimistic. From a telco standpoint. So let's start with the pessimistic one. The reason why also telcos are not really clear and keen on SDN is because the moment is if you identify everything with the SDC, it's not really that much for us that can really appeal to us. Software-defined center, we are worried primarily about networks intents as a paths between multi-sites. This is the pessimistic view, so there is no really interest from us. But the optimistic view is once you see the network as a point of storage, and not only as a point of path-to-path communication, once communication equates semantically to story, once you send packets based upon the content and also based on the address, I think you had an interesting convergence because you can really program in caches and that would serve all point of paths. So that's maybe the optimistic way to go, maybe not during my work lifetime, but I think that is where the network will go someday. There is no question, there is no anymore distinction between packets and content, storage and paths.
So that seems to be happening, that the vendors like SixWind providing some kind of maybe some abstraction to provide the virtualized environment on the server players on the routers. So
yeah, on the routers, not too much. I mean, on the server, yes. Today, the only storage that you have in networks is caches in CDN. It's the only storage as caches. So it's to distinguish, it's a distinct concept from the object storage that you have to run in your database, your Hadoop or your VMs.
Right. So, I mean, I'm actually not clear what that term means, software-defined storage. I mean, most of our storage is based on software, commodity hardware. You have objects, blob store, APIs, just get put, and everything kind of builds on top. So it's the same model that Google, opened up, and I think everybody has latched on to that. One thing I can tell you is that when Azure started, we were wondering, people won't move storage, but we were completely wrong. It's the first thing everybody wants to move. You know, and since we've launched, I think we've dropped price of storage 10 times. You know, I don't think you can do that unless you have the scale and you control the software and the hardware and the network, all three tightly. And that is all, you know, innovation through software.
So I thank all the panel members for giving a good insight on SDN. So please give them a big applause. So a couple of announcements. I think most of you would have seen the new website, nitalumni.org. So we are looking for your feedback to improve the website. So please come by and share your inputs regarding the new website. And that's where we'll be communicating going forward. And as I told you, we are organizing a SDN conference on July 10th at the same location. And you heard what does SDN stand for. So we have excellent line of speakers on July 10th. So Dheeraj Pandey, CEO of Nutanix, it's an virtualization company. They are doing really great. So they are growing at 100%. So they started reporting their revenues, even though they are not public company. They are close to $80 million revenue company right now. And they are growing at 100% quarter over quarter.
And a Lightspeed investment.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah. So we had Lightspeed VC coming to one of our events. So he invested here. Prasad Velanki, he's CEO of One Convergence, SDN-based company. Sunay Tripathi, founder and CTO of Pluribus Networks, and Apolak Borthakur, he's the general manager, Amazon Web Services for the Bay Area division. So all of them will be addressing on SDA topics, and we are also looking for one more speaker. So everything will be finalized in the next 1 or 2 weeks. So this event is on July 10th from 6 to 9:30.